The first time I met Adrian, the world outside felt ordinary, yet something about him turned even the simplest moments into something extraordinary. It wasn't fireworks in the sky or a storm of emotions crashing into me. It was subtle, like a quiet song drifting across a room that you can't help but stop and listen to. He carried a presence, calm, thoughtful, and yet undeniably magnetic. I had been carrying the weight of too many unfinished days, too many moments spent rushing from one responsibility to another. Stress seemed to find a permanent home in my shoulders, and though I always told myself I was fine, my body told a different story. That was when a friend suggested I book an appointment with Adrian, the local massage therapist who had an uncanny reputation, not just for skill, but for the way he seemed to understand the people who came to him. I wasn't looking for anything beyond a simple release of tension. That was all. A practical choice. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The room was warm, filled with soft music that carried the kind of peace I had long forgotten. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, not overpowering but present enough to remind me to breathe deeper. Adrian welcomed me with a kind smile, the sort that didn't need rehearsing. "Just relax," he said softly, his voice carrying a steadiness that felt like safety. When his hands first touched my shoulders, I closed my eyes. It was supposed to be routine, but somehow, his touch was more than professional skill. It was careful, deliberate, almost like he was reading a language written into my skin, one I hadn't realized was there. And in that moment something shifted. His hands didn't just ease the knots in my muscles. They uncovered the places where I had been holding on to pieces of my past, fears, doubts, unspoken worries. It was as if every movement told me, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." I had never felt that before. Not from anyone. Session after session, I found myself returning. At first it was purely for relief, but soon, it became something more. I began to look forward to the stillness, the quiet, and the gentle way his hands reminded me of what it felt like to be cared for. Adrian never asked too many questions, but somehow he always knew. The way his touch lingered at the base of my neck told me he could feel the tension from sleepless nights. The way he slowed when working on my hands told me he knew I was holding on to too much, grasping too tightly at control. It wasn't romantic at first. It was healing. Yet healing has a way of opening doors we don't expect. One evening, a storm swept through town. Rain hammered against the windows of his studio, and thunder rolled in the distance. I had nearly canceled my appointment, but something in me wanted to keep it. When I walked in, he greeted me with that same steady warmth. "Storms don't last forever," he said with a small grin. And I smiled, though my heart carried its own kind of storm. That night, his hands seemed to tell me more than usual. With every movement, I felt words unspoken. "You're stronger than you believe. You're softer than you allow yourself to be. You don't always have to fight alone." I wanted to ask him if he knew what he was saying without saying it. But I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Still, my heart wasn't ready for the story his hands were telling. Days turned into weeks. And weeks into months. Outside the studio, Adrian was just another face in town, the one I couldn't seem to forget. I'd see him in the market sometimes, or at the small cafe by the square. He would always smile, always ask if I was doing well. Never more. Never less. And yet every time our eyes met, I felt that story continue, unfinished, waiting. I began to wonder if he felt it too, or if I was only reading into things my heart longed for. After all, hearts are tricky. They see what they want even when reality is different. Still, something in his gaze told me I wasn't imagining it. One late evening, I arrived at his studio after a particularly hard day. Work had drained me, and an argument with a friend had left my chest tight with unspoken words. The room was quiet, lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. When his hands touched my shoulders, I couldn't hold back anymore. The tears slipped down, silent but unstoppable. He paused, not in alarm, but in understanding. His touch softened, grounding me, reminding me I was safe. And though he said nothing, I felt his presence steady me in a way no words could. Afterward, when I finally opened my eyes, he looked at me with quiet kindness. "Sometimes," he said gently, "it's not just the body that needs healing. It's the heart." And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. My heart was listening to a story I hadn't dared to believe in. I don't know when exactly it changed between us. Perhaps it had always been there waiting. What I do know is that his touch no longer felt only like comfort. It felt like a promise. A promise that I didn't have to hide behind strength all the time. A promise that sometimes, the heart finds its way not through words, but through presence. Adrian never confessed his feelings outright, nor did I. We didn't rush it. Instead, we let it grow slowly, tenderly, like a flower that pushes through the cracks of stone because it's meant to. Our connection spilled into the world beyond the studio in ways both small and profound. He would stop by the cafe where I liked to sit and read on Saturday mornings, bringing me an extra pastry without asking. I found myself walking to the market more often, not because I needed groceries, but because I hoped to see him there. We never needed to speak much, and yet every conversation was rich, filled with unspoken meaning. He listened in a way few people did, his attention like sunlight warming the coldest corners of me. One afternoon, when the autumn leaves had just begun to fall, we walked together through the park. The ground was littered with red and gold, and the air carried that crispness that hinted winter wasn't far away. I remember brushing my fingers over a leaf as I told him about my childhood, about the places I once thought of as home. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer quick solutions. He simply listened and then said softly, "Home isn't always where you come from. Sometimes it's what you find in another person." His words stayed with me for days, echoing in the quiet spaces of my mind. Winter came, and with it, the kind of silence that settles over a town when snow blankets the streets. By then, Adrian had become part of my life in ways I hadn't expected. He brought warmth not just to my tired muscles, but to my heart. We shared simple things, long walks, quiet talks, laughter that felt unforced. There was no rush, no need for grand declarations. What we had was steady, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. And then one evening, as we sat together in his small studio after he closed for the night, he reached across the table and simply held my hand. No words, just the warmth of his palm against mine. A gesture so simple, yet it told me everything. His hands, the very ones that had spoken stories of healing and strength, were now telling me a new story. A story of belonging, of quiet love that didn't need to be dressed in grand gestures. Looking back, I realize I had only been looking for relief the day I walked into his studio for the first time. But life has a way of giving us more than we ask for.